Hi, welcome back to Account Management Secrets. Today's guest is someone who is reshaping how we think about customer success. That's Bob Mathers. Now, Bob has helped countless leaders to tackle one of the biggest challenges in SaaS and beyond, which is how to align the entire company around long-term customer retention. In today's episode, we're going to talk about his 5-year customer model, which is a framework that shifts the focus from chasing quick wins and short-term thinking to building long-term customer relationships that last. We also share why customer success needs to be a company-wide effort and responsibility and not just all fall on one team's shoulders. We talk about how prescriptive onboarding and really clear accountabilities can really help with retention. And we talk about how traditional org charts and go-to-market models might actually be holding your company back from success. As you'll hear, Bob has plenty of opinions and doesn't pull any punches. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Let's get started. Hey, Bob, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Alex. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. We've been plotting this for a while. Why don't we start just by letting people know how is it that you came to be into CS and account management? So why is customer success a thing for you? Is it something you were always intending to do, or what brought you here?
Yeah, great question. It might surprise people to learn that I didn't grow up dreaming of wanting to be a CS leader. I stumbled into it the way I think most people do. I started most of my career in management consulting. So back in the day, that meant, a suit and lots of airplane rides and a briefcase with a combo lock on it. I don't know if those exist anymore, but traveling around largely to Fortune 500 companies, doing some diagnostics, doing a current state assessment, SWOT, all that kind of stuff. And I loved it actually, but then we started having kids and that really didn't serve the lifestyle anymore. So there was a burgeoning tech scene in the town that I live in here outside Toronto, and it was blowing up at the time. So I came to work for a couple of tech companies. Customer success wasn't a thing yet, but it would be in 2 or 3 years. And what I found was that this background in services and always having to make sure that the customer is getting value, always mining those relationships for the next thing, turns out that served me really well when customer success came along.
Got it. So the model of consulting where you're only as good as your last project and you always have to be looking out for new things, lo and behold, that's helpful when you go to a tech company where they have a recurring revenue business model.
Yeah. Who would have thought, right? And the idea that nobody's going to pay you more money until they're getting what you already promised for the money they're already spending, right? So it's just something that maybe we'll touch on, but this idea of land and expand really only works if that land part is really, really solid, which is really what the foundation of CS is all about.
Okay, got it. Cool. Well, one of the things that I found of yours that I was really drawn to is something you've done some work on, specifically on LinkedIn, around the 5-year customer model. So you've got this really cool model that I want to talk about. Tell us about what's going on here with the 5-year customer. What does this model mean? Why is this important? And then, once we have the background, then I want to go through the kind of all the different components of it. But let's very first understand, why is this important? What did you build?
Yeah, the history, it's kind of a long history. And I guess it starts with the fact that this growing frustration that I've had. I've been in CS, in its latest iteration of it, sort of for about 10 years. And this frustration that I have with the fact that we seem to be asking the same questions we did when I first came along. Who should own revenue? We talk about handoffs. We talk about compensation. Most importantly, we talk about the ROI of customer success. And it doesn't seem like the conversation has evolved from 10 years ago. I don't see sales and marketing and other parts of the organization having to defend its existence like CS does.
Yeah, they're not still questioning their assumptions in the way that post-sales is, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And so I think it really comes down to really a fundamental, a flaw in how a lot of B2B SaaS companies are thinking about their business. So if you've been around long enough, you remember the old on-prem model, right? So I in my management consulting days, I worked for worked with a large retail company, and they were spending $80 million on SAP, $80 million. And that was back in the day when you'd pay SAP $80 million, you'd employ an army of consultants. And after 3 years, you had an ERP system that did supply chain, finance, whatever you needed it to do. But SAP didn't really care whether you used it because they got their $80 million. And it was up to the company and the leadership and the employees to drive adoption to make sure that they were getting the value that they and the benefits that they wanted to out of SAP. But along came the SaaS model, right? The subscription economy, where we don't buy anything anymore, just like we don't buy CDs anymore. We don't buy movies anymore. We rent it. And so in that model, the onus shifts from the buyer to the vendor, because nobody pays SAP $80 million anymore, at least not all at once. They pay them $1,000 a month. And whether they continue to pay them $1,000 a month depends on whether they're getting what SAP promised. And so that shifts the onus of getting value from the person that's buying to the person that's selling. And that's a long-winded way of saying that I think most companies are still operating under the on-prem model, where they're going out and gobbling up as many new logos as they can, and seeing that as the path to growth, and not recognizing that the rental model means that's the first 10% of the journey. Like, there's no guarantee that you're getting that other 90% if you don't find the right customers, onboard them properly, and deliver on your promises. And that's what ultimately gave rise to this model, because over and over and over again, I just see us operating in this rental model and still behaving like the purchasing model.
So the mindset hasn't changed to the extent that the business model has. Is that what you're saying? Are we still putting the same burden on the customer for them to do all the work and for them to be the ones who are generating value versus us? Is that part of that consideration too?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you think about the sales process, and it's like, we've got to convince them to buy. We've got to convince them to buy. We've got stages in the sales process, and you don't move from stage 3 to stage 4 until we check these boxes. But all of a sudden the customer buys it, and we just assume, oh yeah, we're going to create an opportunity 12 months out, and we're going to forecast that revenue. Like, why doesn't the opportunity go back to zero? And unless we've got gates to say, okay, they're here at this 30 days, and they're here after 90 days, and here after 180 days. But for some reason, the onus completely shifts, and all of that stuff, all that work that has to happen in order for the customer to get value, it's not sales job, it's not marketing job, it's not support's job. It lands in this thing called customer success, which is the state of customer success in most companies I talk to today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot of very weird dynamics about that. One of the things that I always notice is how much emphasis gets put on top of funnel activities, so sales and marketing and acquiring new customers, versus which are great and they're important for growth, but they are typically not profitable, and they don't have the same growth dynamics as getting like money from your existing customers, where you say, hey, they're more profitable than a new customer, existing customer, more profitable. And I've got more chance to sell to them, and we already have the relationship. And so therefore there's less friction in there, and so on. So that's one of the pieces that always surprises me. And another thing, which I know is something that's important to you, is, the nomenclature around this stuff is pretty weird too. We've got client services, we've got customer success, we've got customer support, we've got account management, we've got this thing, that thing. We've got all these different words for it, which further muddies the waters. So, it's not a surprise that this industry hasn't really been able to kind of break through all that and to fully define what it is and who it's for. We're having a very long conversation about who are we and what are we for.
Well, yeah. And I do owe you an answer on the 5-year customer model, and let's circle back to that. But you're absolutely right. I really do think, and which is a reason I love what you're doing here, Alex, is that I think customer success came up and it was kind of cool. and everybody wanted to be in customer success, and maybe account management wasn't as cool anymore. And I used to be account manager, but now I've got this new job and now I'm a customer success manager. And customer success for so long had defined itself by what it wasn't. It's not support, because customer success is proactive. It's not account management, because account managers are focused on revenue and customer success is all about outcomes. And then in the last 18 months, 2 years, you're seeing this shift of customer success to being more revenue focused. And then it's like, okay, so tell me again how this is different than account management. Yeah. And I've talked to account managers that are 10 times better at customer success than 90% of customer success managers are. So it's the names just get in the way so often. We're like, it's the same thing. I see the stuff that you're talking about. It's the 100% the same thing that most CS leaders are struggling with.
To me, the reason that CS is having this identity crisis right now is, like in a very simplified way, customer success was there to ensure that companies, the customers got onboarded, that they got implemented, that everything's working, that they get value, that they're satisfied, and that they stick with us, and that they renew. Right? Like that's the general brand premise of customer success. Sounds awesome. Like who wouldn't want that? Yes, let's all do that. So therefore, over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of companies invested in this, particularly those in the SaaS space, although there are also companies in non-tech that use the term customer success. So everyone spent all this money on it. But then guess what, Bob? In the last 3 years, we're in a tech recession anyway, right? Meaning all the SaaS companies are getting clobbered by churn, downsell, all sorts of stuff. So they're all turning around and being like, didn't we hire all you people so that we would smooth out our profit curve here a little bit? That's not working. So of course the knives are out for the customer success teams. That's how I see it.
Well, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And that does actually lead me back to this, what gave rise to this 5-year model, because it was actually something that dawned on me, this growing frustration that the CS world hadn't moved further by now. But also it was some data that came out from Greg at Churn RX. And he had published
Greg Danes, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a number that stuck in my head, that the customer acquisition payback period was 38 months for larger enterprise deals. So, of course, through all of the, through some of the changes that you just mentioned, Alex, longer sales cycles, customer acquisition cost is rising. And that means that it's taking longer for customers to earn back just the money it took them to acquire a new customer. And so if that customer acquisition cost payback period is 38 months, you basically have to renew every customer twice on an annual contract just to get your money back. And that struck me because a lot of the companies that I'm talking with and leaders that I'm talking to, that's not a conversation anybody's having.
Right.
And so I rounded up. I rounded up and said, okay, so what if we had a North Star goal across the company that said our job is to attract, acquire, and retain every customer for 5 years? How would that change the behaviors in the organization, how we structure the organization, and maybe most importantly, the KPIs we put in place? And
so
that's
the reason that's important. So I just want to reinforce the reason that we came up with the 5 years model is because it's taking us 3.5 years to recoup the initial investment it took us to acquire the customer. So the customer is unprofitable to us for the first 38 months of life. And only then do they start accruing profits. Do we start accruing profits on this customer journey? Therefore, we've got to get them to stick around, right? That's the math.
That's the math. And whether it's 38 months for you or 24 months or 8 months, it doesn't matter. I don't see that conversation around the unit economics of what it really means to be in this business. We chose this business. We were attracted by the 80% margins in SaaS because we get to write a single line of code and sell it to millions of customers and not have to customize it like we used to. That's the business we chose to be in. But we're behaving like, well, we're just going to take that part of the business, but we're not going to ante up for our responsibility of making sure that we're actually running it with those unit economics in mind. And so it's time to grow up. Like if this is the business you're in, then you're in the business of long-term customer retention. And that's got to change everything that happens across the company.
Awesome. So walk us through the model.
So it's interesting. You mentioned the nomenclature. I was like trying not to muddy the model with traditional terms, but sometimes they're unavoidable. But let's think about the organization in terms of the work that has to be done across the organization, from the top of the funnel to product to finance, everything. And let's put that 5-year customer model right in the middle. And what would the mission, for example, be of marketing, sales, customer success, onboarding, support, et cetera, all around the outside? There's 8 functions of those. And let's not worry about how we're defining those things today. It's an opportunity to step back and say, if you were designing this company over again and you got to start today and you had to design it with a 5-year customer in mind, how would you do it? And so what we do is we end up, for example, looking at marketing. Let's look at marketing, sales, and product, for example, because one of the things you can do is the model's got some standard language in it around how would marketing look different? How would sales look different? And you can do a bit of a scorecard. Okay, so how close is sales and marketing and customer success to these? And by the way, customer success is not off the hook on this. But they're not in the middle. They're around the outside along with everyone else. And because what usually happens is, for example, we look at marketing. The reason that we're not attracting, acquiring, and selling customers for 5 years is because, for example, we don't all have the same definition of who we're selling to or our ideal customer profile. So marketing and sales, because they're measured on MQLs or SQLs and closed deals, they're incented and focused on selling to customers that will buy. You want to buy something? That's who we're going to go out and we're going to fill your pipeline full of people that are got a propensity to buy, and sales' job is to close those deals. And then they get to customer success and they say, we're not positioned to succeed. And those are the disconnects there are the, a main reason why we're not getting our money back on new customers, and they're churning before we earn back that customer acquisition cost. So that's an example of, do we all have the same ideal customer profile? And it's, how would that ideal customer profile change if we only sold to customers that could be successful for 5 years? And we didn't market to them, we didn't sell them unless we had a very high chance of having them renew 4 times, for example. How would that change? And it really sparks an interesting conversation about how well positioned we are to do that today, and how willing the leadership is to change.
So that's a big mindset shift. Is do we all agree? First of all, do we all agree that focusing on a 5-year customer is a good idea for the business? And I think we can make the case that yes. And then we say, okay, so that means we're making some trade-offs between short-term thinking or hitting short-term targets and longer-term goals. And based on that, are we all reframing our current ways of action, our current ways of doing things into something that's going to work for the future? And are we all aligned to make sure that we're all heading toward the same goal? So basically, are we all helping the team win? Right? If we all understand the team wants to win, my job in sales is to help the team win. My job in marketing is to help the team win. My job in product is to help the team win. And that's what we're all doing. But lo and behold, as you just mentioned yourself, when it comes to measurements, KPIs, metrics, OKRs, and incentives, right? So all the things that actually drive our behavior on a day-to-day basis, those can just be like totally at odds with whatever strategy it is that we're laying out here. Plus, we have probably old ways of thinking. We maybe want to get a quick shortcut, to get a quick win. These things all happen. So what you're talking about, Bob, is a big transformation. So this is not something that, the team meeting is, we're going to talk about this in our Monday afternoon team meeting, and by Wednesday, we're going to be ready, right? That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is something that's requiring, as far as I can tell, at least, tell me if I'm wrong, this is requiring a major exercise within the company for us to totally refocus on the customer. And I can only imagine that this only works if the CEO is leading it.
Yeah. So that's really important. A couple of things about that. One, the model came out of my frustration, because a lot of the conversation around customer success are the things that CS leaders can do within its scope of responsibility, right? And we can talk about improving operational processes and putting in place success plans, and all that stuff is really amazing stuff, really important stuff. I talk to my clients about it all the time. But you're not going to go from 18% churn to 8% churn by changing success plans, and you're kind of settling for single digit incremental improvements. And if something has happened in the organization that's so traumatic that it's forcing people to step back and say incremental improvements is not enough anymore, then it needs a larger mindset shift. And you're right, the CEO's got to be on board, and it's usually going to come in response to some traumatic event. Maybe it's a massive customer leaving, but something has got to happen to force people to say, okay, this is not working anymore. Maybe it's a new chief revenue officer. Maybe there's been a shift, because it is harder to do this with a leadership team that's been embedded for a long time, because they've got a lot of stake in how things are working today. And so there's a lot of dynamics, and timing is everything. But I know when I was a CS leader, I stole this saying from somewhere, and it's not particularly original, but you're best positioned to serve the person you once were. And so I think back about being a CS leader and being out of answers, like just not being able to get this larger organizational mind shift across. That's why I developed this, because it just helps to facilitate a conversation about, are we ready to grow up here and really start behaving like a company whose survival depends on long-term customer success? And if not, then we can go back and settle for single-digit incremental improvements and stop kidding ourselves.
You're talking about the difference between 2x thinking and 10x thinking. The quote from Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. And so that's really important. Basically, it starts with, are we committed to change? Are we committed to a different set of outcomes? Are we committed to creating a different organization for ourselves? Walk us through, Bob, so what does the conversation look like? What are the decisions that we're needing to make? What are the questions that we're asking? So I get, let's say I want to do this, and I get the, first set of okay, yes, we need to rethink this. What are the deeper questions that we're starting to dig into here to help guide our strategy?
Yeah. And I think there's not a lot of magic to that part of it, right? Like, for example, I might come in and I would have a bunch of individual conversations just to build some credibility and understand the individual challenges that people are facing around the table. Because at the end of the day, this has to be something that everyone sees makes their life easier and makes them more apt to succeed. But what we do in those early conversations is we really get a sense for how much resistance we're likely to face on this idea. And everybody loves an SKO conversation about big picture thinking, but very quickly we're going to get into how people's jobs are going to have to change and how they're paid is going to have to change. And that's where things really get quite uncomfortable. But like you said, that's where you need the CEO to be on board and to be driving this change. Because if it's brought in by a CS leader or a leader of account management or even a chief revenue officer, sure, everybody in their scope of responsibility is going to be like, oh, it's music to my ears. We love this. But product, marketing, you're not going to get the alignment you need. So it's got to start with the CEO. And again, in the spirit of building something that I think would have helped me at the time, it's made up of 3 pieces. It's sort of like, what are the core functions? What are the behaviors we think we need to drive in each of those functions? And then what are the KPIs that we need to put in place to reinforce those behaviors? And it really helps to take the personalities out of it. Because if you and I are having this conversation, you're talking about something and I'm translating that into my head. Like, what is he trying to say? How is this going to change my life? We've got to try to get people out of their day-to-day lives. And
So I want to ask about a couple of things about the mechanics here. So you referenced Greg Danes' work. Now, Greg, someone I know, awesome guy. He's been on Account Management Secrets. He was our guest on episode 5. Super great at understanding the data and helping us to interpret what's going on. So you mentioned data from him that says something like 38 months is the average payback period, right, for a revenue subscription. By the way, that's a disastrous amount of time, right? Like that is like I don't know when that became acceptable, but that's a crazy number to think that your customer is unprofitable for over 3 years. right? Like there's so much risk built into that. What do you even know? What's the average tenure? Like what's the average time that a single vendor sticks around inside of a company? I would imagine that most of these companies are actually, they might be cash flow positive because they're getting some cash through this, but they're probably unprofitable for their entire existence if they're just cycling through these companies, like in terms of getting new customers.
Well, yeah. And like I said, I imagine that data point is from large enterprise deals, right? That are taking months to close. But the point is, I guess if you were thinking of it in terms of a line chart, it's the slope of the line. Everybody's customer acquisition cost is going up. Everybody's CAC payback period is going
taking
up.
longer.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's not 5 years for you. Maybe it's 3 years. Maybe it's 2 years. But you're still incenting your sales organization to go out and sign new deals and leaving customer success to figure out how to make them successful when your business relies on them renewing at least once.
And so based on that, is a 5-year customer good enough? Like if it took me 38 months just to get to zero, and then I tack on 12 more, another year after that, have I actually, is this really worthwhile? Or do we need to be thinking even more ambitiously about 10-year customers? I'm sure you thought about this when you built your model.
No, I didn't actually, but I do like that idea. Of course. I mean, it's twice as good. Like to your point, 10x thinking. Maybe maybe I was thinking too small. I was just thinking about something that still felt palatable and doable and got to the spirit of the conversation that I think we need to have.
Yeah, for sure. Now, on that point, we were talking about the roles and responsibilities and who might own this and what the conversations are. And I've had several people come on the podcast and talk about the role of the chief customer officer. And so it's a fairly new thing, right? The CCO is a fairly new, like maybe in the last 5 years, it's emerged as a thing. I will say here in public, I'm not sure the CCO is a thing. I'm not sure the CCO makes sense. And I'll tell you why. In almost every company I've seen, when there's a chief revenue officer and the chief customer officer, everyone still considers the chief revenue officer, the CRO, the boss, right? Even if they work for different people or they both work for the CEO or whatever, everyone kind of considers the CRO to be the boss. And why? Because we're all oriented toward new growth, new customers, new logos, and all this like ringing of the gong and this kind of like hunter mentality versus the farmer mentality of the chief customer officer. And so with that in mind, personally, I don't know if the CCO is going to survive another 10 years just as a thing. Like it might just be like there's a blip. I also don't know if customer success is going to survive for the next 10 years, whether that was just a thing that we had for a little while and then it all went away. These may be statements that people are unhappy to hear, right? But I think it's a reasonable question to be asking. Now, given that, and since the people that you are talking to most often are going to live in the CCO, Chief Customer Officer world, and they're going to be interested about your 5-year customer scorecard and all this type of stuff, and they're going to take it on and they're going to get really excited about it, they may very well just run straight into a brick wall when it comes to any kind of implementation because they don't have the organizational juice to make it happen. How do we deal? First of all, is that a correct assessment of the world, do you think? And then secondly, if it is, what can we do about that? How can we reframe or change the conversation to give them more of what they might need to be successful?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In terms of the chief customer officer, yeah, I think it's, I was just having this conversation. They were with a client of mine. They're actually in large scale automotive manufacturing. And so I've seen a lot of interest in this idea of customer success from outside of SaaS, from other industries saying, hey, I'm having some issues around customer retention, or, customers are getting increasingly upset. And I've heard more and more about this customer success thing. So, tell me what it's about and how we can apply it. So that's maybe a thread that we can pull on. But we were talking about whether there would be some value in consolidating a lot of those customer-facing functions under a single leader. And we modeled a few things out and we decided, yeah, it just doesn't make sense. But so to your point, I think it can make sense. I think it's highly situational. And I think it also depends on the leaders that we've got to play with. because sometimes we'll design an org that wouldn't make sense anywhere else, but with the unique set of skills and the priorities and the things that we've really got to get done in the next 18 months, yes, this is the answer for now. And I'm seeing the chief customer officer kind of be the answer, I think, in fewer companies. It seemed to be rising in popularity. And now I don't know whether it's declining, but I think fewer and fewer people are talking about it.
To me, it kind of strikes me as this idea of it's like kind of like a Band-Aid. Like, hey, we have a churn problem. We need a senior person. Let's go find a chief customer officer, give them the title. They seem to know what they're doing. But that perpetuates this other thing, which is, if we really believe, and I believe this is something that you've talked about before, if we really believe that the ultimate success of the customer is everyone's job, like we all need to be focusing on this. And at the same time, then we pick out one person and one team to sort of be our example of this and to be the leaders. That sort of defeats the purpose of saying this is everyone's job, right? Like in that scenario, the CEO would then be the head of customer success because it'd be his or her, overall responsibility. So, but I've heard you say that, we can't have it both ways. Like we can't say customer success is everyone's job and then only measure a small part of the company on customer success.
Yeah, right. And one last thing on that CCO thing. It's like, I think ultimately people are looking for a single throat to choke. I think they're looking for a single point of accountability for the customer experience and the economics of that, which, as you said, flies in the face of holding everybody across the company accountable for their role in long-term customer success.
And I've always been like, I both resist and am really impressed by the companies that just sort of give customer success the finger, right? And like, we're not going to do this. Instead, we're going to build a great product, right? And we're just going to have the best product and service out there so that, we have a team that fixes bugs or like issues, but we're not going to overinvest in this area because we know that the value is from the product. So when I see that, part of me is like, oh my gosh, that seems like, a step too far. And then I admire the fact that they're saying, no, we're just going to take all this energy and put it into building something really, really awesome. Because a lot of times, especially in early companies, I think this is true for sure, CS is simply there to be like the guys with the first aid kits and the Band-Aids across all the things that are broken in the entire company.
Well, yeah, that's well said. And that explains how customer success becomes kind of the everything department and becomes a bit bloated. It's interesting. I also think there's something to the idea that the funding really changes the landscape of how these companies grow. So those expectations with investor money coming in, set the expectations on, growth, and that becomes new logos and renewals, et cetera. But it's a lot easier to hire people than fix your product. And so as you're going out and you're experimenting with new things and you're bringing on new customers, we got, oh God, these customers need a lot more help than we think. Yes, as you said, the solution absolutely has to be the product if this business is really going to scale. But hey, we've got numbers to meet quarter by quarter, and we can hire somebody a lot faster and stick a Band-Aid on it a lot easier than we can fixing some of the fundamental problems with the product. And it just snowballs into something that, a company is 5 or 7 years old and they've got an army of people filling gaps that the product should be filling itself.
Yeah, quite. You mentioned a conversation you were having with a client around, not in the SaaS space, around customer success. Who else is starting to speak this language? I think one of the branding problems that customer success has had is it's viewed as only something applicable to the technology space, right? Historically. So I don't think that's a good thing. I think that it's a wonderful term. Whoever wants to call themselves customer success, they should. They ought to do that. Who doesn't want customer success? Everybody does. But like really specifically, Bob, what types of companies have you seen now saying, hey, we used to call these people, client delivery or account management or client directors, and now we want to call them all customer success? Like, is this a wave that's actually happening, or is this still just a trickle of interest?
I don't know if I'd call it a wave. But I would say that 2 years ago, 100% of my business was technology companies. And now I would say it's about 50-50. And that 50 non-tech part is hospitality services companies in hospitality, automotive, and government. And so what ties them together is an interesting question, because every company on the planet has promises they're making to their customers and has to be able to deliver on that. It's certainly in the B2B space, right? B2C is, it's fundamentally the same, but I don't think customer success applies in the same way in a B2C environment. So all of those companies have account managers, have client directors. And so what they're struggling with, though, is, again, more the fundamental mindset shift that you talked about on how do we get the company aligned around long-term customer retention and happiness, and not have it be the responsibility of the sales organization or the account management function. And I don't know what it is that's changing in those businesses that has made it the problem that need to tackle now, or whether it's always been there and they've just never had a fresh perspective to say, oh yeah, this customer success thing looks like it might be the answer. By the way, it's not, but it is a really useful way to reframe the conversation and to look at tech, because the fallacy, of course, is that tech's got this all figured out. You and I know that they don't, but at least innovative leaders in tech are realizing that this is the way to build a scalable company. And it requires us to rethink everybody's role across the company. And we might as well look to tech to do it, because we're not going to find the answers in the traditional places within our own vertical.
Now, when you have, just in terms of putting a bow on all this here, Bob, when you've deployed the 5-year customer model for your clients, and part of that involves, starting from scratch, or total, blue ocean thinking, blue sky thinking, as it relates to the teams and what they're doing and all that stuff. What do you find? Like, what have you found to be the optimal structure here? Are people merging the hunter and farmer roles, or are they splitting them out into even more granular detail? Do we have more teams, fewer teams? Like, what are you finding to be? And I know that this is all pretty new and evolving. But what have you been learning about what the optimal structure might look like in the future?
Yeah, I love that question, because, of course, it depends. It depends on the size of the company. Because in large scale automotive, for example, we were saying, well, maybe we should split the hunters and farmers. You got the same account execs that are responsible for going out and finding new business. And these are long sales cycles, really complex, but they're also managed kind of stick handling. They're kind of like a hunter, a farmer, and a CS person all in one, right? And does it make sense to split that into, if not 3, then 2? And we dug into it and we thought we could do that. But it doesn't, where does that get us, right? And we still bump into the same issues that are happening, around maybe quality or on-time delivery that are happening the rest of the organization. It's like, it doesn't matter whose job it is. Unless we fix these fundamental problems that are outside the sales organization, it's not to say that the role shouldn't be split, but that's probably not the most important thing to do now. And it's also going to create a lot of turmoil in the organization. And maybe that's just not the hill we want to die on today. In another organization in the hospitality side, they had account managers, and we spent some time. We did spend some time splitting out customer success and long-term, let's say, call it outcomes focus and ROIs focus, compared to the myriad of reactive things that were getting put on their plate. So one thing we know is that whenever reactive and proactive fall under the same job, reactive will eat everything. So if your focus is, if the priority is to create whatever you want to call it, account management or customer success or something new we haven't thought of yet, if it's supposed to be long-term, strategic, and proactive, it can't live in the same role as putting out fires all day. And so what that means is it's a long-winded way of answering. It depends. I don't think it matters even within industries. I think it's a function of how big you are, how fast you're growing, how complex your product is. I will say, even in SaaS companies, I really like the idea of an account team structure for your biggest 20, 50, and that you've got specialization, but you've got a pod of specialists that are working together, and everybody knows as much about that customer as everybody else, because those customers are so big, they require that investment from us.
Yeah, the pod structure is something that's come up a couple of times in my conversations with folks. I agree. It can work. It can work really well. It's tricky on the incentives. It's tricky on a lot of things. But in terms of coverage for the account and coverage for the life cycle, it can be a really good system. Awesome. Well, hey, Bob, thank you so much for joining us on Account Management Secrets. I appreciate the tour through the 5-year customer model. Maybe now you will even consider building a 10-year customer model to make their customers even more profitable for everyone involved. But thanks so much for joining us here and sharing today.
Wow, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time, Alex. And yeah, why not a 20-year model? I mean, let's go.
There we go. Think big. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks.